We're going to start with Chargers at Chiefs on Sunday Night Football. Let's start with the Chiefs offense versus the Chargers defense, where the Chiefs, I mean, Tage, they keep winning games. They keep on winning games. It doesn't matter if you're a high school team or if you're the best team that's ever existed. They will beat you by 3 points. The win against the Raiders was like particularly high in the shenanigan meter. Like that was really, really, I just can't believe it sometimes. But I mean, they keep winning. So who am I to fight that? They kind of like a weird formula. They want to get heavy. Isaiah Pacheco is back. I think their issues at left tackle are super real, and like they are something that you are going to have to worry about. You see it in that Raiders game pop up a bunch of times. I do think DeAndre Hopkins has been pretty productive there. So they still have that strong interior offensive line. So I think that overall they just are what they are. What do you think for some of the stats for the Chiefs offense?
Yeah, I agree a lot with what you said there, where they do want to get heavy on offense. They play the highest rate of 12 personnel in the league. They're pretty efficient out of it as well. And they'll also play a decent amount of 13 personnel, where they're really getting three tight ends out there on the field. And as we've talked about before, Noah Gray is a good player. So the more that they can get him onto the field is good for the Chiefs. And where they stand right now as a whole on offense is ninth in EPA per play, second in success rate. So they don't have a ton of explosive plays, but they are still just pretty good on a down to down basis. And what I think is really interesting about the Kansas City offense this year is they're first in EPA per play, success rate, and EPA per dropback on late downs. And so when got to have it situations, Mahomes is always going to turn into a bit of a different quarterback, and they can still run the ball in these situations as well, just because Kareem Hunt, which is now going to become a lot of Isaiah Pacheco, is really good at churning out 3 to 5 yard carries. And so when they get into those spots on late downs, they can do a better job of that. The negative of the Chiefs offense right now is just the pressure and sacks that's happening from Mahomes' perspective, where they're 19th in sack rate on the season. They have been consistently top 3 in sack rate before this year. So that's been a big drop off. And Mahomes' pressure to sack rate has gone from 2.2% last season to 7.7% this season. And so, as you mentioned, left tackle is a big issue for them with the way Wanya Morris is playing. Some of the tea leaves in press conferences this week kind of may point to DJ Humphries being the left tackle for the Chiefs this week. So we'll kind of see how that plays out. But that has been a big issue for them so far this year.
I think when you're looking at people that you pick up in the middle of the season as big contributors on huge playoff teams, like it always gets me a little bit worried, but I guess I just continue to trust Kansas City. That's interesting on the late down point. Like that makes sense when you think about Patrick Mahomes. When you need to have it, when you need to convert, he is your guy. He's going to be able to scramble. He's going to be able to run just fast enough to get that first down. Of course, though, and you're going to look at that with a little bit of volatility. Maybe Mahomes is just immune to that. I do want to ask you before we move on to the Chargers defense here, the point on Mahomes taking sacks. Like in our kind of AI metrics, he has certainly looked a little bit worse in terms of sack avoidance. But do you think it's more that before the season, it was like at such like a Hall of Fame level of sack avoidance, and now he's kind of falling? And maybe it's just one season on a long resume. It's just like this season he's at like a good but not great level. So it's like when you start that high, you're going to kind of fall back to earth, kind of along that. Or I don't know if you see it kind of as a long-term problem.
Yeah, that is a good point to bring up, where when I am building out my metrics for different things that players do on the field, like scramble rate, sack rate, I always pad it a little bit with league average, just because if you're at the level that Mahomes is at in terms of taking sacks, you still want a little bit of just pulling back to the mean, just because it's hard to sustain that level of play for that long. And so maybe we've seen a little bit of that pullback just in his play this year, but I think it's mainly a function of just him not being super comfortable in the offense right now, where offensive line or tackle play hasn't been particularly great. And then like the receiver play before Hopkins showed up and after the Rashee Rice injury also wasn't great. And so as they go down the last couple of weeks of the regular season, it'll be really interesting to follow if that like kind of all falls into place, if that happens in the playoffs for them, like we've seen last year. So that's definitely something I'll monitor the rest of the way.
I can't wait to post the Super Bowl pod if they go and they win. Then I'm just gonna pull up all of our notes and all of the things I said about like this is a little bit worrying. This is a little bit worrying. This is a little bit worrying. I do feel like if this was just kind of not an average team, but like another team in this situation, it would just be like, man, we'd be talking about a lot more things. But when you keep winning, some things just don't matter. Tage, let's move on to the Chargers defense here, where we did a long discussion on Jesse Minter earlier in the season. I feel good that we did that earlier in the season because it feels like he continues to move in the right direction. I'm always going to talk about specifically how they match routes, in their zone coverage, where you're going to see people turn into space. You're going to see them really prioritize like taking away particular areas of space that offenses want to attack. So that's something I really like about this defense, them trying to do their best to fit the run from their light pre-snap presentations. A lot falls on the defensive line there. I do think they're getting some decent linebacker play there as well. They had a good plan for the Chiefs earlier in the season. That was the game that Rashee Rice, of course, got hurt. So I think a really interesting unit that maybe they're overachieving overall. I think if you're a Chargers fan, you got to be just super psyched about what they've been doing this year. What do you have for the Chargers defense?
Yeah, I think that's like a really key point on their defense where Jesse Minter is clearly showing that he can continue some of the good play calling he had last year in college and bring it over into the NFL where they rank fifth in EPA per play allowed. And what I think has really stood out about this Chargers defense is even though they weren't particularly talented entering the year, they had a lot of question marks, especially in their back seven where there just wasn't a ton of resources poured into those groups. Like they've been one of the better teams at not allowing yards after catch this year. And so Minter sets up his defense where he wants you to throw it short and he trusts his players to come tackle. And they've done a really good job of that where they've allowed the least amount of yards after catch this year on average. And then once you adjust for situation, they still rank top 10 in that metric. And so when they play a lot of too high like they do, where they play the third highest rate in the league, being able to tackle like they have, where they're keeping the balls or the throws in front of them and they're able to come up and finish the play has been really key for this defense.
Play too high, play a light box, keep the ball in front of you and tackle it. Sounds like the person that was calling their defense before Jesse Minter as well. I do think Minter, he's up for stats and scheme defensive coordinator of the year. Tage, I think this year, if things continue to go as they are, we give Vic Fangio the Emeritus Award just because, like, I don't know, not that it feels wrong to award a guy who has certainly in a past time before stats and scheme gotten so many imaginary podcast awards from people like us. But yeah, Minter is doing a fantastic job there. I think that every team, or maybe like in theory, you want to be able to prioritize the pass. You want to be able to force checkdowns. You want to be able to tackle. You want to be able to fit the run from a light box. Not every team can do that. And when you can do that, I think it shows on film right away. It really makes a difference. And it continues to pile on game after game to a way that, look, the Chargers defense is just good at this point. So that I think is a real positive situation. Tage, what do you think here is a positive situation when we're thinking about the Chiefs offense against the Chargers defense?
Something I think that the Chiefs offense can have a matchup advantage in this game is when they use play action. And so this is something that I think Andy Reid will do more of in these types of bigger games or matchups where he feels like he can show some of the plays that he feels more confident in. And the Chiefs do rank 22nd in play action rate right now, but I feel like they've just used more of it in critical situations this year, like the overtime against the Bucks, where we saw a lot of play action. I think it was 5 of their 8 pass attempts. They used it. And the Chargers have not been good defending play action passes this year, like inexperienced linebacker group, some of the way that their defense is set up. And so I really like for the Chiefs to use play action in this game and really try to target that middle of the field when doing so.
I like that. I like that one. I want to see how much the Chiefs are just able to run on that interior because the Chiefs have such a strong interior offensive line. I do think the Chargers have gotten decent play on the inside there, particularly from the defensive line. So I always I think of it as maybe a little bit of a strength on strength. I think it's certainly more of a strength for the Chiefs. And then when I'm looking at these matchups, I always think, oh well, one unit's really good, the other unit's good. You still want to do what you're good at. Like you still want to lean on that. You're not saying, oh, this team has a good defensive line. We just can't run the ball. So I think that's something that I'm certainly going to be watching throughout this game. What do you have for the other side of the Chiefs offense against the Chargers defense, but from the Chargers defense perspective?
Yeah, good matchup for the Chargers defense in this game is Khalil Mack versus whoever ends up playing left tackle for the Chiefs, whether it's Wanya Morris or DJ Humphries, where Mac is still a pretty good player at this point, both with his run defending and his pass rush ability. And we just saw against the Raiders on that Black Friday game, like Clayvon Chason had a huge game just against Morris, like constantly getting pressure in the backfield. And so you'd probably think the same thing would happen in this game just because of that matchup and where the talent lies on that side of the ball.
I'm very impressed by Khalil Mack this year. Always happy to see guys that it feels like they still have it. I kind of like the matchup overall for the Chargers secondary, which again, like I feel like I always talk about teams that when they match routes, and maybe not that it's a unique way, but it's just, I guess, a little bit different than the majority of teams that we see. So maybe I'm literally defining a different way there, Tage, but it does feel like the secondary is meshing well, where coming into the year certainly wasn't something that I expected at the highest of levels. I do think you're getting Derwin James put in some good spots there as well. I mean, they had 4 interceptions against Kirk Cousins, which of course some of that's going to fall on Cousins. I don't want to say that it's just the Chargers defense, but that was a lot of fun to watch if you're a Chargers fan. What do you have here, just like kind of as a matchup you're thinking is fun here for the Chargers defense?
Yeah, something fun that I'll track in this game is Xavier Worthy versus zone coverage. And so you have a Chargers defense. They play the third most zone in the NFL as charted by FTN data. They're pretty good when playing said zone coverage, but you have Xavier Worthy who goes from a 55% success rate when targeted versus man to a 45% success rate when targeted versus zone. And there's been a lot of instances this year where Patrick Mahomes and Xavier Worthy just haven't been able to connect a lot of deep passes that have fallen incomplete. And a lot of those have been against zone coverage. And so the stat that, fantasy football players like to use when trying to search for some positive regression is unrealized air yards. So like, what are your total air yards on passes that ended up falling incomplete? Xavier Worthy is 475 of those this year, which is the 18th most in the league. So again, you mentioned like come playoff time, I'm sure Mahomes and Worthy will start to hit on some of those deep passes, but right now they just haven't been able to connect on them. And so we'll have to see what ends up happening in this game.
The unrealized air yards, that matches what we watch, right? We're seeing Xavier Worthy open down the field, and for whatever reason, whether it's ball maybe not perfect, or his feet are kind of are just getting out of bounds, or throw too far, throw too short, ends up being a drop. Just situations where it in past years has just been a completion that far. And so, yeah, maybe there is some regression there where we see Worthy just running into the end zone in the playoffs. I do want to see in this game just Deion Henley. He missed practice at some point this week, so I'm not 100% sure if he'll play. I assume he will, but just situations where he's dealing with blocks inside and then going to tackle Isaiah Pacheco. I think that will just be a fun one to look at.
Yeah, I hope he plays because that would be really fun to watch. And like Henley, I think kind of embodies the switch from Brandon Staley to Jim Harbaugh, where you had that athletic story last year, where they were talking about how Staley just like forgot to wish Henley happy birthday. While he like wished like everyone else on the team whose birthday it was that week. And now you have like this year, like Henley has just been like super excited to be a part of the organization, and you have Harbaugh who's like gone out of his way to shout him out and to wish him happy birthday this time. And so I think it's just cool to see like for his specific player to have that type of shift and just like not being wanted and now like being wanted and being a key contributor on the defense.
Okay, so I like this. Like the happy birthday test, is that the test of a good coach? Did you wish all your players a happy birthday? But what's the protocol for when you miss wishing someone a happy birthday? That you probably should wish them. Obviously, in the old Facebook days, it's like easier to just like you see the birthday pop up and then you automatically get to do that real quick. I feel like it's a little bit tougher now. You got to keep track of these things. Tage, obviously for us, it's lucky that our birthdays are right next to each other, so I feel like it's hard for us to forget. But if I miss your birthday, like, is it a 2-day grace period, or how long before you start asking for a podcast host change?
Yeah, I mean, I think like a day late, you can say belated. If you're telling the person happy birthday, like, oh, happy belated birthday. 2 days or more after that, like it starts to become tough to come up with an excuse for why you
What
missed
about if you see
their
that
birthday.
person like 5 days later, though? Then you've really put yourself in a bind there. It's like we're
Yeah,
5 days, we're outside our 2-day window that we've just established, but you're seeing the person. It's like, all right, we're just not going to recognize this. It's tough out
you
here.
you just be like, oh yeah, what'd you do for your birthday a couple days ago?
Now we're doubling down. 100%.
Yeah.
Let's move on here. We got the Chargers offense against the Chiefs defense. The Chargers beat the Falcons scoring a grand total of 0 offensive touchdowns. A fantastic feat. I always love when I see that. Lad McConkey had, I think it was like 117 of 171 passing yards from Justin Herbert, or receiving yards off of Justin Herbert passing yards. They are able to be successful on film, at least when they're using play action, getting that crosser from McConkey over the middle of the field. Sometimes I feel like, all right, well, this offense, its ceiling is clearly limited, but at the same time, Justin Herbert just always has the juice. So there's always a possibility of that. I do think that the run game has been maybe a little bit less than what they would have expected this year. What do you have as some stats for the Chargers offense?
Yeah, Chargers offense has really settled around being a league average offense. And they're both league average when it comes to the run and the pass. The one thing that I'm like kind of monitoring going into this game and maybe the next couple of games after that is I don't know how they survive without their two best skill position players and J.K. Dobbins and Lad McConkey, where Dobbins was having a great year, lots of explosive runs. McConkey's obviously had an awesome year. He ranks fifth in yards per out run right now. A lot of that is because he is the main target getter on an offense that doesn't have much competition, but like he's still a very good receiver. And so if he ends up missing this game because he's dealing with an injury right now and appears doubtful to play, like it's going to be very tough for the Chargers offense to survive because of how much they rely on him in the pass game.
Yeah, and then I think if he misses that game particularly, and the defense plays really really well, they should have drafted a receiver or another receiver in the first round is just going to be so loud. Where look, they're building for the long term. I want to feel positive about the situation overall. Again, I just think looking at the team overall, it is just an overachievement, particularly in terms of record, and hopefully you can just continue to trust that team building process overall. Let's move here to the Chiefs defense, where there's been some ups and downs here. I think for the Chiefs defense, maybe a little bit. All right, I will say for every team like at the absolute top of the NFL, like I'm always gonna like look a little bit harder because like this team's gonna be playing late in the postseason. So I feel like okay being like, all right, well, there's this issue with this team's unit. Like the injury opposite Trent McDuffie has certainly been an issue. I'm not exactly sure how it gets figured out. Obviously, health is one thing, just kind of getting better play from that opposite corner spot, but it does feel like you can really attack that spot and you're forcing Spags to do different things to overcompensate in that direction where I don't think he like always wants to. So I think that it unfolds some things there. And then the pass rush just not playing as well as I think that it needs to. Always going to trust Chris Jones late in the postseason. Dude's a closer, so that I'm not worried about. But I think that maybe as Uche comes along a little bit, you get a little bit better play from Carl Loftus. Then you can kind of figure things out because I mean it's a good unit, not a great unit. Where I think coming in, you expect it to be a really great one. What do you have here for the Chiefs defense?
Yeah, I agree with a lot of what you said there, where they've had this drop off in their pass defense since the Jalen Watson injury, where up until week 7, they ranked ninth in EPA per dropback allowed. They were playing really well on defense. He was showing that he could be the CB2 opposite of McDuffie, like you mentioned. But since his injury, they ranked 28th in EPA per dropback allowed. And they've seen some not so good quarterbacks. So like that's like not good for their defense to be at. Obviously, he doesn't fully account for that drop off. Like no singular player can really do that on the back end of a defense. But yeah, like their pass rush outside of Chris Jones is a little bit concerning. Like you're hoping that Uche or Karl Loftus can really step up down the stretch, like you mentioned. And so this defense is fine. Like they still, probably around a league average to below average defense as it currently stands. And obviously their run defense has played well, but they're really going to need better cornerback to play. And then also just more pass rush outside of Chris Jones going forward.
Yeah, I had such a hard time with the like who teams have played, or like you always look at defense early in the season. They like at the top right of every single graph, and then you look in the middle of the season. It's like, oh yeah, all the teams they played are now 2-4. So those are always interesting situations. I'm thinking about just a positive matchup here for the offense, the Chargers offense. I think maybe because Trent McDuffie actually hasn't logged a ton of snaps in the slot over the last 4 weeks. He has, or he did certainly a lot in those first weeks. Obviously, you get the injury, you're kind of just moving parts in a different way. Like I said, I wonder if you find ways to attack kind of the corner opposite Trent McDuffie in any sort of way. But when especially if Lad's out there, or if he is injured and missing that game, he is injured. But that is, I think something you would like to attack. I'm just not sure kind of who is going to be doing that particularly. What do you think here is a good matchup for the Chargers offense perspective?
Yeah, I really like the one that you mentioned, and the one that I kind of found going through the data was when Spags blitzes Herbert. I do think that the Chargers could have a little bit of an advantage in this game where when they're not blitzed, they have a 0.00 EPA per dropback. But when the Chargers have been blitzed this year, they've gone all the way up to zero point 0.2 EPA per dropback. So pretty significant jump in how efficient they are. They've been good against 5-man blitzes, which is like what the Chiefs and Steve Spagnuolo likes to do. Granted, a lot of the production off of blitzes has gone to Lad McConkey, and so again, if they don't have them in this game, this probably changes. But Quentin Johnston, Josh Palmer, and even Will Disley can get some targets, from Justin Herbert when blitzed, as he's trying to avoid taking a sack, and so hopefully that can be enough for them to keep going on the pass offense when they're seeing pressure.
Lad McConkey, really, I feel like an all-time name, just a strong name that I love saying over and over, which is one of the reasons, obviously, why I hope he is playing in this one. Tage, I wanted to ask you about this real quick. So we talk about just like sack avoidance against the blitz overall, and to me, like there are two kinds of sack avoidance where there's the like traditional one where you see a guy kind of avoiding people in the pocket, but then I guess there's also this other one where you're going to have an unblocked blitzer or something like that, where you're throwing the ball in the right spot, maybe throwing hot. Like, I guess, do you see that as sack avoidance? And then how do we kind of deal with crediting a quarterback, whether it's, hey, I take my drop, like I'm getting the ball, I'm actually not seeing this blitzer, I'm comfortable with everything that's happened, I'm just throwing within the rhythm of an offense, and then it happens to be that a blitzer is there. I'm just looking at kind of some of our sack avoidance metrics and our assumer sack avoidance metrics overall, and just think about like, well, how do we kind of divvy up the credit there? I don't know if you have any thoughts on the sack avoidance question.
I do like that distinction that you mentioned there, because when there's plays where, let's say, there's unblocked blitzer, and just because of the way that the quarterback operates, like they had gotten the ball out in time before that blitzer could really affect them. Like I do kind of see that as some sort of sack avoidance, because you're still like operating in an offense where if you're getting the ball out in, let's say, like under 2.5 seconds, you're usually not putting yourself in the opportunity to get sacked. And so that's the one sort of sack avoidance. And then the other one is more obvious, like when you get pressured, like trying to evading that pressure to get the ball out. But do you kind of see it where, like, when a quarterback has an unblocked blitzer headed towards them, like, is that on them usually, because like for not setting the protection, or kind of for not noticing that there might be a blitzer that comes through the line on like the pre-snap look when the quarterback is surveying the defense?
So I wouldn't say that it's. Oh, I mean, there are certainly times where like, hey, they just get the protection wrong. I think the bigger point to me is it's on them in the sense that some protections are going to be set in specific ways. The defense knows it because there's like X list of protections. It's not like we have this infinite amount of combination. I suppose you could, but we don't. So it's usually that in the protection, the quarterback is now responsible for the unblocked blitzer, in the sense that if that player is actually coming, because they're not accounted for, now you have to be able to make the hot throw. So you're in your route concept, you're going to have maybe a specific route that's breaking similar to that area, or it's just a shorter route. So if I'm, say you have 5 linemen, so you have 6 people in the box, and say just one of those guys is, if this blitzer comes, our running back is going to go to the flat. Our quarterback has to be responsible for that player in some sort of way. You don't just always want to say, hey, just go ahead and make that guy miss, because that is really hard. That's going to be a volatile situation. So I would say responsible, but I wouldn't say responsible on the front end. I would say it's more that, hey, you have to find a way to kind of make that happen. And for me, that's why sometimes it feels like, hey, that's a little bit of a decision making thing as opposed to a sack avoidance thing. But Tej, I guess, a sack avoidance extremist could say that every play without a sack is sack avoidance.
Yeah, I mean, I can get behind that statement for sure, because yeah, I mean, like the decision making aspect is probably just like folded into it, where it's like, you kind of see a situation where, let's say, the defense is having some sort of zero blitz where they're going to be sending a lot of guys at you, so you think about like who your hot is, who you can get the ball out to quickly if you need to, or like what kind of audible you're going to put in, and you can just fold all the sack avoidance stuff into that, where it all comes back to like, we can have all these fancy metrics, but sack rate just does a good job of telling how often the quarterback is avoiding sacks at the end of the day.
Did I always love talking to you about football, because both of us, we just like evolve like in real time. You love some stats, you love some stats a little less. You get really nitty gritty, and then you're like, yeah, sack rate is fine. Who needs all these other ones? Let's finish off here with the Chargers offense versus Chiefs defense. I don't know if you have any kind of comments just on the run game overall, Chargers gap runs and zone runs, etc.
Yeah, the one thing that will probably just be like more fun to watch in this game is seeing how the Chargers and like Greg Roman's offense deploys their runs where on gap runs, the Chargers have been good at them and the Chiefs defense hasn't, so maybe they lean into that more because when seeing zone this year, like inside zone, outside zone type runs, the Chiefs defense has been really good at defending them. That's a main reason why their defense has been so good. And so I would like to think that the Chargers lean more into some of their gap runs in this game just because of that.